Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to see you all back here. If I could ask you to please find your seats so we can begin this evening's program. Thank you very much. Also, while you're finding your seats, please find your cell phones and set them to silent or vibrate. Thank you very much.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's been quite a while since we've been able to do this. It's great to see everybody here. Yeah, let's... I'm Pete Crane, the Vice President of Education and Access here at the National World War II Museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you back to the U.S. Freedom Pavilion for our first Meet the Author event since March of 2020. March of 2020. It's hard to believe that it's been 19 months since we were all together, and there's a lot of familiar, friendly faces here in the audience tonight. It's wonderful to see you. I'd like to welcome members of our trustee family. Robert Pretty is with us tonight, Bill Goldring, Ann Abbott. Also, great friends of the museum, Senator John Alario, Major General Dave Mize, and General Sands, Tom Sands. I'd also like to welcome those of you watching at home on our live stream feed tonight. You've been our loyal audience for the last 19 months, and we hope that you'll continue to tune in as we host our public programs and people here on campus. It's also a special night because it's my privilege to introduce tonight's MC, Dr. Michael Bell. Mike just joined us this Monday as the Executive Director of the Institute for the Study of War and Democracy. You will get to know Mike very well, and he is truly an impressive officer and scholar. Mike was commissioned in the Army from West Point, beat Navy. He is a combat veteran and a historian, a strategist who has served at every level from platoon to theater army and beyond. He served in places like the U.S. Central Command, on the Joint Staff, the Office of the Secretary of State, and the White House. He served as Dean of Faculty and Academic Programs at the National War College and as Chancellor of the National Defense University's College of International Security Affairs. He's authored many of our nation's strategies, including authored or co-authored the 2004 U.S. National Military Strategy, the National Military Strategic Plan for the War on Terrorism, the National Security and Defense Strategy, the National Military Strategy of Kuwait. Yes, he is good enough that not only does he do U.S. strategy, he did it for our ally. In 2017 and 2018, he served on a detail to the White House as the National Security Council's Senior Director of Gulf Affairs, Senior Director for Middle East Affairs, and Special Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs. And as if he hasn't had anything else to do, he has a new book coming out, General John J. Pershing and the Creation of the American Staff System in World War I, which will be coming out from the Army University Press. So I think you understand why we are all so happy to have Mike aboard now. So I look forward to working with Mike, as we all do, as he leads the Institute into the future. You'll see him often at these public programs, especially next month's International Conference on World War II, which I note that we do have a few tickets still left. Just saying. Now, to welcome our veterans and to introduce tonight's speakers, it's my pleasure to call to the stage for the very first time, Dr. Michael Bell. Mike?
Well, thank you, Pete, for that introduction. A little humbled by that, but hello, everyone. It sure is great to be here with you, and it's great to be part of this amazing, amazing team at the museum. As Executive Director of the Institute for the Study of War and Democracy, certainly one of my responsibilities here will be to host these events, but also that's really a distinct privilege. The opportunity to continue to learn, but also to interact with such an incredible group here in the audience. Like all of you, I love this subject, I love our country, and as such, I really cherish the opportunity to learn more about this epic event in American history and world history, the Second World War. I understand there's a tradition here at the museum for our programs, and that tradition is to acknowledge and to recognize our special guests in attendance. I would like to ask if any World War II veterans or Holocaust survivors, homefront workers, please stand and allow us to recognize you. Anybody at home, you can stand at home and be recognized. Let's give them a hand anyway. Now, pretty amazing, we're here to celebrate their legacy, hopefully carry that forward, and we're honored by just to be associated with them. And next, any veterans we have or current members of our armed forces, regardless of era. Some of you may have served before World War II. But if you'd please stand as well, we'd like to acknowledge and recognize you. To all of you who've worn the cloth of our country, it sure feels good to be in such fine comradeship and company with each of you. And, thank you for your sacrifice, your service, and thank you for your family's sacrifice as well. We know, that certainly can be quite difficult for them along this road, but thank you very much. And then finally, if I could ask any Patriot Circle or Charter members to stand as well. Patriot Circle, Charter members? Okay, come on. Yep. I said please. It's your generosity and support that really enable the critical resources, as I understand it on my whole, 3.5 days on the job, that really make this museum's legacy collections available for all generations as we go forward with this important story. And thanks for what you do. I know these are challenging times, and it really does make a huge difference. So the format for tonight's program, we're going to have a brief presentation by the author, Tyler Bridges. And then, did Tyler escape? I don't see him. There he is. Okay, you're hiding behind here. Because we have these signs that say Bridges here, and you're over there. I thought, this is a bad sign. But we'll We'll have a brief presentation by Tyler, and then that's going to be followed by a conversation between Tyler and Dr. Rob Citino, the museum's renowned Samuel Zemurray Stone Senior Historian. And certainly Rob's no stranger to the audience here, to our supporters. This really will be an amazing event. Thanks, Rob, for doing that tonight. We add more and more to your rucksack each time, and you continue to shoulder it amazingly well. Rob's the author of 10 books. He's the museum's go-to expert for all things history. So for those who don't know Rob, you'll get a chance to glimpse him tonight, but he's got an impressive resume, and that he's the guy, both internally and externally, that we turn to for events such as tonight's program. So, thank you for that. So our featured speaker tonight, Tyler Bridges, is probably well known to many of you as well. Tyler is an impressive bio. I haven't met you much in person, but your bio's pretty amazing. He's twice member of a Pulitzer Prize-winning team. He's a journalist based here in New Orleans. Did I get that close to right? New Orleans? Who reports on Louisiana politics for the Baton Rouge, New Orleans Advocate. He's also written for the Washington Post, Politico, and other publications. Graduate of Stanford University. He's the author of 5 books. Is awarded Columbia University's Maria Morris Cabot Award for 10 years of foreign reporting in South America. It's a pretty incredible achievement. 2011-2012, a Nieman Fellow at Harvard. 2017 was a Sorensen Center Fellow at Harvard again. And this fall, he's a Distinguished Fellow in Residence at the Annenberg Public Policy Center at the University of Pennsylvania. So an amazing, amazing achievement. Now Tyler's here to talk about his latest book. It's called The Flight, A Father's War, A Son's Search. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Tyler Bridges and Rob Citino. Yeah, come on. Okay, good to wait. Thank you.
So there's a kind of thing about it being a reporter as opposed to other people. It's sort of a strange thing to be speaking to a crowd, and I see some politicians here that I've covered. So it's humbling to have to give a speech, and they're much better speakers. And I'm afraid that John Alaria, who is the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate, at some point is going to use the phrase, call the question, get off the stage, Tyler. But just an irreverent, if you can indulge me. So I was thinking as you walk up, why is it that men walk up and they always button their jacket? I've never figured that out, and I didn't do that, but I guess I should. So anyway, am I looking okay? Because this morning I did an interview on WWL with Eric Paulson, and I live in a condo just about 4 blocks away from here. And there's one part of the house where the lighting is not very good. And that's where the best place is to sit because it has a nice backdrop of books and things like that. So I was sitting there at 6:10 this morning and it's still dark. And I've turned on all the lights in the house that I can turn on. But I looked to myself and I think it's a little dark. So the producer comes on the air and I say to her, do I look okay? And she says, yeah, you look fine. And about 5 minutes later, I say, do I look okay? I'm a little worried. So, yeah. So then I look at the video after the thing over, and I say to my daughter, I think I look like Quasimodo. I looked so dark, and then there was sort of light on different parts of my face, and I needed makeup on, and I didn't have any makeup, so. All right, so I forgot my glasses. But I have something here that I put in extra bold, extra type to be able to read this. So actually, this is a bit of a serious topic, so enough of the jokes. But I also, before I do begin, I want to thank Rob Citino, who's sitting over here, Nick Miller over here, who there was a point when I didn't know if this book was going to see the light of day, and they both read it, and they gave me incredibly encouraging words. And then they were also able to, Rob particularly, was able to help me get this thing be published. So very, very grateful. So it feels really good, kind of like feels like this is where I should be tonight, and honored and humbled that you haven't had another speaker for a long time, and I hope I don't mess it up for the next one. So now, all right, now I'm going to get serious. So my sister Allison shouted from the bedroom. Our 2-day vigil was about to end. Dad was about to die. My other 4 sisters and I rushed in and gathered around his bed. The date was June 29, 2003 in Santa Cruz, California. We held hands and sang several of Dad's favorite songs, including Camelot and Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Within minutes, he had taken his last breath. We wept and called the funeral home. A half hour later, we watched the hearse turn out of his gated community. Richard W. Bridges, 83, World War II hero as B-24 pilot. So read the headline for Dad's obituary on page 5C in the San Jose Mercury News. The date was July 4th, 2003. The article summarized his wartime exploits and noted the 4 medals he had been awarded: Purple Heart, Distinguished Flying Cross, Bronze Star, and Air Medal. It also noted the downside. Richard Bridges carried more than memories home from the war. The article reported he learned to enjoy the free cigarettes included in every rations kit and was a Tareyton smoker. Most of the rest of his life, that would kill him. He died of emphysema. The obituary concluded by quoting from an oral history he had given in 1999. The biggest effect the war had on me was that I acquired a sense of responsibility, Dad said. Having command of a bomber at age 23 teaches you that. When we got out, we just wanted to go on with our lives, and so we put the experiences behind us. During my dad's funeral, my siblings and I took turns recounting our favorite memories of him. I talked about how he didn't miss any of my Little League baseball games in Palo Alto and how he cheered our beloved San Francisco Giants at windy Candlestick Park. I also read an excerpt from Steve Ambrose's The Wild Blue, the men and boys who flew the B-24s over Germany. They wanted to get off the ground, be like a bird, see the country from up high, travel faster than anyone could do while attached to the earth, more than electric lights, more than steam engines, more than telephones, more than automobiles, more even than the printing press. The airplane separated past from future. It had freed mankind from the earth and opened the skies. So that's what Stephen Ambrose wrote. So I had been the source of the information for the San Jose Mercury obituary, but answering the reporters by the questions sort of left me with a gnawing realization that I really had never resolved what I must admit were my own uncomfortable feelings towards my dad, particularly during my adult years. And at the same time, I only knew the bare outline of my dad's story during those epical wartime years. I had hazy memories of his favorite wartime anecdotes, along with the 10-page account he had given to a local historian in 1999, and my scribbled notes when I had twice thought to ask him some questions. But what exactly had he done during the war? And how might that relate to my distant relationship with him? As time passed, I felt a growing desire to find out the full story. The war didn't just usher Dad into manhood. It clearly served as the defining event of his life. After he returned home, he sought an uneventful, quiet, and unambitious life. He didn't seek out friendships. After his children were grown, he spent most nights reading about World War II, World War I, or the Civil War. Could it be that he too was searching for answers to questions that gnawed at him? Or did the books allow him to relive his wartime experience? I thought that learning more about Dad also could perhaps help me come to better terms about my feelings toward him and help me better understand myself. So here's what I found. And this is how I begin the book. Dick Bridges ducked into the warplane's open belly, pulled himself onto the catwalk that spanned the bomb bay, and clambered up the 3-foot step onto the flight deck. With 2 quick paces, he reached the cockpit, laid down his parachute pack, and slid into the metal chair on the left. It was the pilot's seat on a B-24 bomber named the Fascinating Witch. The rest of the crew members, 9 in all, also climbed into the plane and took their stations. They would soon be taking off on a bombing mission from Odna Air Base just southwest of Tunis, Tunisia. The date was October 1st, 1943. First Lieutenant Richard W. Bridges was an average-sized man for the time. He stood 5 foot 8 inches and weighed 160 pounds. He wore his brown hair in a crew cut above a handsome face with hazel eyes beneath broad eyebrows. But you couldn't easily make out his features under the bulky air crewman's uniform that he wore to combat the freezing temperatures that he would have to endure on the unpressurized aircraft. Underneath his coat and trousers, he wore a jumpsuit that provided heat when, via a cord, he plugged it into a socket in the cockpit. An oxygen mask and a breathing tube hung around his neck. Dick would need them, though not for several hours. Now I want to tell you a little bit about the Fascinating Witch. That was the plane that my dad was piloting that morning. It had never fully recovered from the attack against the Ploiești oil fields a few weeks earlier, flown by another pilot. Over the next few weeks in September 1943, after the Ploiești raid, dust and sand from Odna, the airbase, had compounded the Fascinating Witch's problems by infiltrating its mechanical parts. Ground crews had difficulty maintaining the aircraft, and the 2 inboard engines were burning too much oil for the plane to operate properly. The squadron engineering officer moved to ground the Fascinating Witch in late September of 1943. That decision frustrated Dick. He didn't want to be left behind in Tunis on the next mission. The lieutenant felt he hadn't yet done his part for the war effort. Sure, he had flown 8 missions, but almost every time he wound up bombing secondary targets, or serving as a diversion. He pleaded his case with a squadron engineering officer. The Witch could withstand the strain of the next mission, he argued, because the flight would not last longer than 10 hours. It was not safe, explained the officer. Yes, Dick agreed, but the Allies needed every available airplane to take it to Hitler and to the Jerrys. The officer relented. It would be a fateful decision. Dick and the other crewmen had been roused from their sleep at 4 a.m. before the sun rose over the Gulf of Tunis that morning. Enlisted men on duty went from tent to tent. Time to wake up, they called out at each stop. You're scheduled to fly this morning. After breakfast, Dick and the other officers walked from the mess hall to an open-air briefing, where, under lights, they sat on ammunition cases and spare parts crates that served as makeshift benches. It didn't take long for the briefing officer to pull away the curtain over a map on an easel to reveal the target. A taut piece of colored yarn connected Tunis with Wiener Neustadt, a town just south of Vienna, the same target they had hit on August 13, 6 weeks earlier. Until recently, their mission had been to assist the Allied offensive in Italy. But Allied troops had broken through German lines there, allowing the 44th Bomb Group to attack other targets. Number 1 on the list was the Messerschmitt factory just north of Wiener Neustadt, which continued turning out 200 to 400 German fighters per month. And the airplanes could also hit 2 other factories and also the airport that was there. So the goal was to destroy all of that on this mission on October 1st, 1943. So getting to Wiener Neustadt would be a long haul. The briefing officer explained to Dick and the other officers, the plan called for the crews to depart Odna, circle into formation, and head northeast. And Wiener Neustadt lay 820 miles away. Getting there would take nearly 5 hours. They were supposed to reach the target a few minutes before noon Tunisian time, drop their bombs, and then return to Odna at cruising speed, which is about 170 miles per hour. The Army intelligence officer gave a briefing that morning. The mission would be as easy as the Wiener Neustadt attack 6 weeks earlier, he said, when all crews returned home without a scratch. Army intelligence had found no sign that the Germans had strengthened defenses there by moving flak batteries around the airplane factory or deploying factors. Any fighters encountered over Austria or Yugoslavia will probably be inexperienced and not particularly aggressive. the briefing report said. The briefing report was wrong, however. Hitler had flown into a rage after the initial mission against Wiener Neustadt because it was the first time the Allies bombed his native Austria, and that was something his generals had promised would not happen. So the Germans fortified the anti-aircraft guns and installed a fighter base near Wiener Neustadt. And Dick's decision to fly that day turned out to be a bad one. His plane developed engine trouble during the flight, the fascinating which couldn't keep up with the other planes. Dick should have turned around, but he pulled a tricky maneuver, a daring maneuver that allowed him to catch up to the other planes and be in formation when the bombers reached Wiener Neustadt. Numerous planes were hit that day, including the fascinating witch. "We're on fire," shouted someone from the rear over the intercom. Glancing over his right shoulder, Dick saw an orange ball of flame engulf the midsection of the plane. Black smoke poured from the witch's fuselage. Onboard engine tanks began to explode. Pow, 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 electric cables short-circuited. Dick rang the emergency bell and tried to level off the plane. Seconds later, he shouted a bailout order over the intercom just to make sure everyone got the message. They hadn't needed any prompting. Bombardier Schuler and Navigator Stiefel had already pushed their way through the nose wheel door below the pilots and gone out, feet first. DeSalvio and D.O. Bridges needed only a single step from the flight deck to reach the bomb bay and drop through the open doors. As he fell away from the earth, D.O. Bridges saw no sign of earth, only clouds below him. Panic momentarily gripped him. He had no idea what lay below. But after he pulled his air parachute open, passed through the clouds and saw the ground, he felt both relief and lucky. Meanwhile, amid the chaos aboard the aircraft, the fascinating witch, Jiggs Sussex scrambled out of his ball turret. An explosion blew him against the bomb bay bulkhead. Sussex got up and took a step toward his parachute. To his horror, the fire was about to engulf it. He reached down and snatched up his rig just in time. Strapping it on, he rushed to one of the waist windows. Sussex tried to jump out, but his feet somehow got snagged inside. For several terrifying seconds, Sussex banged against the side of the downed plane, the doomed plane that Dick was trying valiantly to keep level. Sussex was stuck half in and half out. He was sure he would go down with the witch. But gunner Jack Rosenstein, wounded, somehow lifted himself up from the witch's floor. He grabbed Sussex and yanked his feet from free and out the window. Sussex found himself plunging toward the earth. He pulled the ripcord and began to float toward the Austrian countryside below. He wouldn't die aboard the witch. Rosenstein saved Sussex's life, but he went down with the plane. Rosenstein kept his vow that he had shared with his fellow crewmates weeks earlier, that he would never allow the Nazis to capture him. That was Jack Rosenstein. By now, the attacks had also knocked it out the witch's left rudder. Dick and Del Phelps, the co-pilot, struggled to steer the burning plane while the others bailed out. Now it was their turn to leave. They had not a moment to lose. Phelps sprang out of his seat, put on his parachute, and rushed toward the open bomb bay doors. He paused. "Jesus, Dick," Phelps yelled toward the cockpit. "Let's get the hell out of here." He then jumped out. Seconds later, the fascinating witch exploded with Dick aboard. A day later, Dick Bridges will become the first American prisoner of war in Hungary. I'm shifting gears now. During my research, I tried to find out if any of the crew members of the Fascinating Witch were still alive. I was particularly interested to reach to the family of Jack Rosenstein. Did they know that he had died a hero's death, saving the life of Jig Sussex? I intensified my search for his relatives. I knew he was from Hartford, Connecticut, so I contacted the Hartford Public Library, which found Jack Rosenstein's 1943 obituary. It contained the names of family members, which is what I needed. One evening in the summer of 2009, I called a man named Jerry Rosenstein in Hartford. After identifying myself, I tried to prepare him by saying that this was going to be an unusual call. "Okay," he said. "Are you the brother of Jack Rosenstein, who died during World War II?" "Yes," he replied. I explained that I was researching my father's World War II activities and that he had piloted the plane on which Jack died. I added that I found information on how he had died, and I was trying to find more information on his brother. Jerry told me to hold for a moment and then yelled to his wife, "I got a guy on the phone who says he knows about how my brother Jack died." Jerry returned to the phone. I told him that I had learned that Jack had saved the life of another crew member aboard the Fascinating Witch, but had gone down with the plane. Jerry wasn't sure what to say. I felt compelled to tell him that not only had my father piloted the Witch, but he had also pressed his commanding officer into letting him fly the aircraft on the mission that cost Jack his life. Jerry had no response to that, but promised to help me get information about his brother. I didn't hear from him for some time, however, and I wondered if he was upset at me. Weeks after I spoke with Jerry Rosenstein, who is the brother of Jack, I received an email from Jeff Rosenstein, and this is Jerry's son, the nephew of Jack Rosenstein, who had died. It turned out that Jerry Rosenstein wasn't angry. As you can imagine, your phone call and the information provided in your emails has provoked a lot of discussion and questions, Jeff Rosenstein wrote. It turned out that Jack Rosenstein's mother, Anna, had not believed the tragic news back in 1943. She had heard somewhere that badly wounded soldiers who suffered amnesia would throw away their dog tags and somehow make their way back to the home area where they would be hospitalized. So she visited hospitals up and down the East Coast looking fruitlessly for her son. The American military generated pages of documents after the war to prove to Rosenstein's parents that they had found their son's remains. The records show that he had been buried in Plot K, Row 6, Grave 2, at the Wiener Neustadt Municipal Cemetery on October 6, 1943, 5 days after the deadly mission. He had been buried while wrapped in a mattress cover, and he was wearing his electrically heated flying suit and summer flying trousers. Dental records, ID tags on his clothing, and a favorable comparison between Jack's skeletal remains and his last measured height and weight all confirmed his identity. In 1949, the Army Department attempted to settle the doubts of Rosenstein's parents by reporting that after the war, their son's remains had been moved from Wiener Neustadt to an American cemetery in France. The letter also reported that American graves registration personnel recently had dug up his remains there so the family could choose his final resting place. The Rosensteins decided to bring their son home to Hartford. They would mark his death every year by visiting his gravesite, but the family never fully believed that it was Jack who was buried there. I soon learned from Jeff that my original phone call to his father, Jerry, had set the family to digging through old records for more information on Jack. 3 weeks later, Jeff wrote me again. "I am so grateful that you embarked on this story and made contact with our family. However painful it might be, I feel certain that clarifying things for my dad and researching further into the story about Uncle Jack, your dad and the rest of the crew is an absolutely wonderful opportunity to reconnect with his brother and the story of our World War II heroes." In 2012, I went to Hartford to visit Jerry Rosenstein, Jack's younger brother. Jerry and his daughter Susan drove me to his congregation's cemetery. They unlocked a gate and we walked through the overgrown grass to reach Jack's grave. On a gray headstone, a Star of David and the word "Son" topped 5 lines of Hebrew script. Underneath that in English was his rank, name, and birth date, along with 2 additional lines. Killed in action, European area, October 1st, 1943. In 2020, Jeff Rosenstein, Jerry's son and Jack's nephew, sent me an email to explain why the certitude about Jack's death mattered so much. Before, he wrote, the family never recited the prayer for the dead each year on the corresponding date of the Hebrew calendar, nor was Uncle Jack's name inscribed in the synagogue's Book of Life as a reminder to the congregation of loved ones lost on particular dates. Afterward, the family commemorated Jack's death each year on October 1. Even more significant, Jeff added, the date held another emotional connection to the tragedy of war. That fateful mission was flown on the second day of one of the holiest holidays of the Jewish religion, Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. Our family now lights a memorial candle on the second day of Rosh Hashanah and gives pause during the day to remember our Jack. Our family is grateful for reawakening the memory of Uncle Jack. We now strike up conversations about Uncle Jack all the time, reminiscing, debating, wondering, proudly retelling his story. My dad would have appreciated the Rosenstein's family closure. Thank you.
This is the Quasimodo seat over here.
Which one's the
This one, I got the Quasimodo seat.
Hey, did the politicians, did I do okay? Russ Herman spent a lot of time in a courtroom, okay? Oh, sorry.
We're having the sidebar here. We have to get serious. Tyler, that was a fantastic talk. It's a fantastic book as well. Thank you for the shout out. One thing I remember when you brought us the manuscript, Nick and I both, Nick Mueller, the president, CEO Emeritus, founder of the National World War II Museum, right there in the front row, we both read it, and overnight we read it. Nick, we couldn't put it down. And we told you that, that is some kind of book. I've now had, my wife has read the book. I've been stopping people on the street and forcing them to read the book. So
How much do I owe you?
You've done it here, pal. I mean, you really have. This is a fine piece of work. Let me ask you a couple of process questions. I like the way you just framed the book, especially talking about the Rosensteins and your dad's crew member. How do you get started on a book like this? Where do you start? So look, it's about World War II, but it's also about Tyler Bridges, not knowing that much about his father's story. What was the first piece of evidence you had? Where did you start? You knew some things because you helped write your father's obituary, right, for the newspaper. But tell us a bit about process. How do you get into a book like this?
Well, as a journalist, we're always taught, and I've got a couple journalist friends over here, including my boss, Martha, that we're not supposed to be part of the story, and it's ingrained in us. So so I was never thinking about myself. When I was growing up, as I mentioned, I'm the youngest of 7 children. And, I hear from children of World War II vets, and they typically say that their father never talked about the war. My dad did tell stories. And, we were all young. All 7 of us were young, hearing these stories. It was sort of, Dad's telling his war stories again. So I knew the basics of my dad's story. And it was really his death in 2003 and Steve Ambrose writing about the B-24 pilots and crews, got me thinking, I need to know my dad's story because it was the defining part of his life, the formative moment of his life. And those of us with gray hair, we all have had formative experiences in our lives, right? And then that helps us know that our parents had formative experiences, right? That something, whether it was in war or maybe it was on something in their childhood or their college or first job or whatever. But I knew that it was my dad. It was World War II. So I thought, well, let me try to figure this out. And I had a fellowship at the Hoover Institution at Stanford for a week. And so I thought, well, why don't I make a stab at it? And so literally the first thing I did was to find out that he belonged to the 44th Bomb Group. And he was a member then, I think, of the 66th Squadron. So I went online and I discovered there was a 44th Bomb Group Veterans Association. So I wrote a letter to the secretary there. How do I get in touch with the crew members? That was this, I've done a lot of investigative reporting, long stories, and I always try to start a certain way, and in this case, it seemed to make the most sense was to get as close as I could to the story. Who were the guys on the plane with him? And it turned out that some veteran had compiled a bunch of information, so I now had the names of the crew members. That was online as well. So, the top guy's here. Now I'm gonna start sweating.
No. It was good until this moment.
So I wrote, and I learned. I got these letters back that there were so many of them were deceased, and I learned something that there's a crew of 10. So you count my dad, 1, and 6 had bailed out on this last plane, and had survived, but 3 had died. And that was one of the first lessons, Rob, was that the stories my dad told, he left out a lot.
Yeah.
I never knew that 3 guys had died on that plane. So I just started there and then just started looking for more information. And the key thing was writing to the National Archives. Did they have any records on Richard Bridges? And that turned out to be the treasure trove. But it was just kind of putting one piece and then another piece and then trying to be organized and then moving forward. And when I've learned when you write a book, this is my 5th book. I've never written a bestseller, but I know how to write a book. I don't know how to I don't know how to write a bestseller, but for me, writing a book is like running a marathon. It's just one foot in front of the other. It's not trying to go long distances. It's just kind of plodding forward. And so you're just getting a little bit more information, and I realize that I'm sort of filibustering this question. Hilario's waving at me. Time's up. That at a certain point I thought, God, maybe there is a book here. Yeah. And then I faced the question. People started saying, and I started telling people stories as I'm working on the books because I like to tell stories. And so people said, wow, that's really interesting. And I was able to get telegrams that the War Office sent. I got a copy of the telegram that was sent to Rosenstein's family, that your son died. And the story of reaching out to the family and that sort of stuff. And so I thought, I got to put that in the book because people said I should do that. I went to Europe twice, put that in the book. And so I faced, how do I write that? And not to sound pretentious, but I remembered in Grapes of Wrath how Steinbeck, if you remember, how he had certain chapters of the story, and then he would kind of do a digression. He'd go off on a different thing. So I thought, well, I could do that too.
Works for Steinbeck.
Yeah, it didn't work for Tyler though. So I wrote these. So I wrote the original version of the book. It had my dad's story, and then it was broken up with what I called the backstory, my search for his story. But people, including book agents, said, no, this doesn't work. And so I was stuck for a while, and somebody who was here earlier but has left, but many of you know Clancy Dubose. So I wrote a book on the 2015 governor's race called Long Shot, about how John Bell Edwards, pulled off that incredible triumph, and I did it with a guy named Jeremy Alford, who's another journalist. And Jeremy and I hired Clancy to help us edit that book. And literally, the last day we spent on it, we went from like 8 at night until 3 in the morning with a Google Doc, going through we'd all marked up our changes, so we'd go through one by one to see, all right, which change, if Clancy thought we should cut something, what do we cut, or how do we edit, or whatever. And so Clancy did a fabulous job. So I'm stuck with this question where this book is not working, Steinbeck style. So what do I do? And so Clancy looked at it, and he came back and said to me, you got part A, or part 1, and you got part B. So when you get to the book, you'll see, if you read the book, I hope you will, you'll see that...
They'll be for sale tonight. You'll be signing
yeah,
copies.
they've got some books here. You'll see that the first part of the book, which is most of the book, is my dad's story. And then the second part, which is the part that's sort of harder for me to write because I have to write about myself, and I'm not always maybe the most introspective person. I'd sort of rather be asking questions and hearing somebody else talk than doing what I'm doing tonight. But that's part 2 of the book. So that was a long answer
That was
to your question.
You filibustered that one. No, that's fine.
Covering
Though.
all these politicians.
You're being quite modest. You said I went to Europe twice. To give the real brief version of the story, as you'll know when you read the book, Tyler's dad bails out over Wiener Neustadt and makes his way across the border into Hungary. And we're not quite at war with Hungary yet, so he's not a prisoner of war. He's an internee. He's in a villa. From there, he winds up in a German prison camp. He escapes from the Germans, gets across the border into Yugoslavia. The partisans are involved. This is a cast of thousands. So there's a lot of research that went into this book. So how far into the process were your trips to Europe? You had to lay some groundwork for that, Tyler.
Yeah, and I have a tendency to over-report. Is that right, Martha? That's my editor over here. I just want to know the story so well. Yeah. And so, I said I was able to interview one of the crew members on my dad's plane. Although he had suffered a stroke, so he really wasn't that helpful, but it was thrilling to be able to talk to him. I got good information. I found some widows of the crew members, including I mentioned the co-pilot, Del Phelps, who was actually my godfather, who died a long time ago. And his widow gave me the little anecdote that what her husband said that he had said to my dad just before the plane exploded. And the trips to Europe were very helpful. It's amazing these days what you can do with research. There was a guy in New Zealand. I used to post information on World War II sites and a lot of just sort of blind emails, but somehow this guy in New Zealand came across me and he said, you need to talk to Di Davies, he said to me. And then not too long after that, I found myself talking with the one guy still surviving who escaped with my father in Yugoslavia. I mean, wow. And he saved my dad's life at one point. And so then I was able to go over to what is now Serbia to go literally follow my dad's footsteps, where he was held, where the partisans sheltered him, do the same thing in Hungary. There was a family, when I was growing up, I collected stamps. Maybe some of you collected stamps a little bit too. And every Christmas we would get these stamps from Hungary. And, wow, stamps from Colombia, from Hungary, that was really cool. And it turned out there was a family named Rapasi that would send us a Christmas card every year. And it turned out that Dr. Rapasi had been the doctor when my dad, after he was surrendered in Hungary and he became the first American prisoner of war in Hungary, he was taken to hospital there, and Dr. Rapasi was the guy who treated my dad. And there was a real sort of connection, I guess, between my dad and Dr. Rapasi being older. And Dr. Rapasi tried to keep the Germans from knowing that my dad was there in that hospital while he's recovering from the burns when he was literally on the plane when it exploded. So my mother and father were divorced when I was 8. And fortunately enough, my mother wanted to help me in my research, from this man that she had divorced years before. Because I said, there's this family, this doctor, I got to find him in Hungary. And she knew the name, and she said, he may have a son who has the same name. He might have a son who's a junior. And she found an old address book with Dr. Rapace's address. And so I ended up, again, just these crazy contacts I would make. I contacted an English language newspaper in Hungary, in Budapest. Hey, I'm this guy, I'm trying to find somebody. Can anybody be helpful? It's a World War II story, and someone agreed to help. And they found a number for Dr. Rapace, and he did have a son who was a junior. And so I ended up in Hungary having dinner. Dr. Rapace and his mother had died. And his wife had died. But I ended up having dinner with Dr. Rapace's twin children, twin sons, both of them doctors. And one of the wives was there for that dinner in Budapest. And so Dr. Dennis was the older one, so we're visiting. And then there's the other son whose name is Gabor. And then he wants to tell me a story. And he says, I want to tell you what my middle name is. And he said, my middle name is Richard.
Oh, man.
Wow.
Yeah.
Even telling that story right
Even
now
telling
kind of
it now.
gets me. Yeah, Dr. Rapace gave the middle name for his son after my dad.
There are some very poignant moments in this book. Brought a tear to my eye. My wife Roberta wept like a baby reading this book at numerous points. You meet one of the partisans. His name is Dusan Mavac, and Yugoslav partisans who sheltered your father. And just a brief quote. You said when you're standing there talking to him, you realize you found your dad's rescue point, where he'd been sort of flown out of Yugoslavia by aircraft. And you said you felt as if you were standing on sacred ground. Can you tell us what that moment is like?
So I get to Serbia, and I hire a guy who would be a driver, and I had a lot of experience in this because I've been a foreign correspondent. Hire sort of, it's called a fixer. So I had a driver and had a translator, so I always remembered that I knew my dad had ended up somewhere in Hungary, and I used to get Google Earth, and I would try to look at Google Earth and try to think, where was my dad? Where had he been? Where did he first show up in Hungary and surrendered? And then I got these documents I told you from the National Archives, and they named the town and all the details. My dad spelled it all out when he was after he made it back safety. But I was also wondering, well, he was airlifted to safety out of Yugoslavia. Where was that? But I couldn't figure it out on Google Earth. I kept looking at Google Earth. Where was it? I knew the general area. So I end up in Serbia, and we drive out to this area, and me stumbling around, I say, is there an old partisan here in this little village? And there was. And this guy, he had, I'm not a very descriptive writer, but he really had what's called apple cheeks. He had this great smile. And he knew exactly where to take us to where this airfield, it was a meadow. And when I did get there, I did feel like I was on sacred ground. It was just an incredible moment to think, wow, this is where my dad, but for all of this, may not have gotten out of Yugoslavia.
Let me ask you one more before we get on to the real meat of the evening, which is the questions from the floor, because they're always great. We have a museum here that's dedicated to helping people keep contact with their loved ones and their service record from World War II. It's why this museum exists, right? Is to keep that memory alive. You're a skilled investigative reporter. We know that about your career. You've written books before. You've covered gubernatorial and state house politics and Louisiana full contact body sport, right? We would say that here in Louisiana.
That's why I'm here.
That's exactly right. what advice might you give folks who want to know more about their loved one's World War II service record, or to get back in touch somehow with a parent who might have passed, and maybe, I know even in my own case, I wish I'd sat my father down and asked him more questions when I had the chance. And
Yeah,
now
that's
that chance
that's
has
the regret
passed.
I had, was as much information as I was able to get. And I'm kind of amazed as I look back all the information I was able to get. I do have deep regret that I did not have this chance decades ago when my dad was alive and in good health to figure out, sit down with him and like this guy Di Davies, who he escaped with. I wish they never had a chance to reunite, and they were brothers in arms. And another guy who was an American flyer who showed up in Hungary as well. He was, years later, his daughter told me he wanted to find my dad, and they never got together. So I have this terrible regret that I didn't use my skills years ago and take initiative to make things happen. I'm going to do a Bob Livingston, and I forgot the question.
I think it's good. But somehow you answered it, Tyler, and that's the most important.
Some of you know what I'm talking about, right? That was a 1987 governor's race where he was in a debate and he was running for governor, and he forgot the question and he got nailed by the press. So I hope I won't get nailed by the press here.
It's only being live streamed to 50 million people nationwide. Before we get into the questions from the floor, and we have reached this moment, I would point out to everyone in the room, when you turn around, you're looking at the nose cone of a B-24 Liberator bomber.
What was that question
in
anyway?
the back of the hall.
Do you remember the question?
Yeah, the question was, what advice would you give people?
Oh, I'm sorry, what advice?
And
Yeah,
you
so that's a
answered
good
it.
question.
You
Yeah,
ask your
so-
parents, ask your dad questions, ask your loved ones questions.
No, but there's a lot of information online. The National Archives has great records online, and you can type a father, or grandfather, or uncle, whoever, and do searches. And there's great records in St. Louis, although there was a fire that destroyed a number of those records. And the National Archives keeps incredible records as well. I think probably just anybody who wanted to get information on a loved one or whatever would find certain information. And obviously this museum has done great work over the years in documenting the records of men and their service as well. So it may take a bit of digging, but that, if you want to get more information, it's probably out there somewhere.
Thank you, Tyler Bridges. That's a great conversation. I knew it would be fun, and it was. I think it is time to kind of break this out to the audience. We have Jeremy Collins in the
Yes,
audience.
please raise your hands.
Raise your hand if you-
Thank you to Tyler and Rob, but please raise your hands and I'll bring you the microphone. Questions, anyone?
Come on, Jim Lattin.
I know Rob's got a lot more in his folder there.
Got a million.
Jim, do you have one, sir? Just a minute, let me bring it to you.
Okay, great. Thanks for calling on me, Tyler.
It's nice to have the role reversal.
That happened a lot in school, and it didn't go well usually for me. You were talking about, of course, your father landed and ended up in Hungary. And you mentioned that Hungary had not yet had not yet gone to war officially with the United States yet in 1943. That fascinated me because Hungary was an Axis power that was essentially the government was allied with Germany. And so in that context, you mentioned that a key part of your story was the fact that your father bonded with the physician who treated him. Did you learn any more about how difficult it was, though, for him to navigate among the Hungarians? Was he accepted or protected by the preponderance of the people he came into contact with, or was this a very dangerous place for him, as he would have been, let's say, in Austria or Germany?
Yeah, my dad was very, very fortunate that he did not get captured in Austria. He was burned and he was bloody, and he was barefoot on the ground in Austria. And as I mentioned, the 6 crew members were all captured there, and they all spent the rest of the war in a German prisoner of war camp. So that would have been my dad's fate if he had been captured in Austria as well. But he was able to escape detection and make his way to Hungary. And I was able to go, I think, on the same route that he did. At one point, I thought about taking off my shoes and walking barefoot. Yeah, I didn't do that. But you know, one of the fun things of doing a project like this is you get to learn history. And so I did a lot of studying about what was going on in Hungary in 1943 and 44, the same thing in Yugoslavia. And one of the interesting things, Jim, that I learned was that when my dad showed up in Hungary, although Hungary was allied with Germany, they were trying to switch sides. And actually, and this is something I really didn't know anything about, how Jewish people were given tremendous freedom in Hungary in 1943 and 44, and that was something that Hitler did not like at all. I mean, and I'm a little nervous saying these things because you probably know this history much better than I.
I'll stop you if I need to.
Okay. So, so my dad showed up at just a great time to be there if he had to show up as a prisoner of war. And again, remember, he was the first American to POW there, and they treated him fabulously well. But there was this whole struggle going on that, you know, of course, my dad had no idea what was going on, but my dad had a lot of freedom there, and there was this power play going on, and I end up doing a bunch of research on this as I tell the backstory of a couple of the other guys in my book that my dad came across with. And it was in March of 1944 that Hitler finally lost patience with the admiral who was running Hungary. Horthy, is that it?
Horthy, yeah.
Horthy. And Hitler sent in a bunch of troops to occupy Hungary in March of 1944, and one of the guys who was part of that whole effort was Eichmann. And so really, until that point, the Jews had been protected in Hungary, and that ended with the occupation in March of 1944.
It's really the last Jewish community of any size in Europe that was still extant by 1944, and really the sort of the final blow, if you will, of the Holocaust, or the final solution against the Jewish people. It's a horrible story. Your father's timing could not have been more fortunate coming to Hungary when he did.
Gentleman to your left in the back here.
Hi, this is more of a methodology question, and you kind of already touched on it, but I'm currently working on the bombing war over Austria, and I have my bomb wing is going to be in New Orleans in a couple of weeks, and so I just want to know if you had any advice on like how to go about making the most time of that interaction that I'm going to have. Facebook page really isn't doing it at the moment, so.
To do what?
Like just advice and like speaking with families of veterans and with veterans themselves, and like trying to be as like courteous and objective as possible, while also making sure research is also being done.
That's a good question, Tyler. If I think of your interplay with the Rosenstein family, you had to kind of play that a certain way. It must have been some thought went into that phone call you made.
Right, and you're talking about veterans in this country or in Austria? Yeah. Well, I guess always start cautiously. But I actually think that, I think a lot of times people will open up in ways that might surprise you. Since there's a couple of former elected officials here, I can tell a secret that we may not have told them when they were in elective office, which is that, you know, people like to talk, and that's an advantage for us as journalists. And if you can get them to feel comfortable with you, they'll start to tell you their story. So that's why I say sort of start cautiously. But you know, if you're genuinely interested in someone's story, and I'm fortunate to be just a genuinely curious person, and I like to hear people's stories. I think if you genuinely show interest in somebody's story, and you know, have your antenna up if you start to head into dangerous territory, but you know, I think people will open up and tell you their story.
Straight ahead in the back here.
Tyler, since you've written the book and did all that research, what changes did that make in your life?
Put him on the spot.
Didn't I already say I'm not very introspective? So,
You forgot the question.
I forgot the question, yeah. Bob Livingston once, no. I don't know that it materially changed my life. It certainly gave me a much better understanding of my father, and I actually don't want to say too much about that because that's in the last part of the book, and I sort of don't want to spoil something. I do believe if you gain a better understanding of your parents, that Richie, if you gain a better understanding of who you are. And I was surprised to learn that my dad I think he minored in Spanish, and I ended up going to South America and learning Spanish. I also learned that my dad was very good at math, and I wasn't so good at math. Just as an aside, and so I'm sort of dodging your question here, but an incredible thing that my dad was the pilot, again, of the Fascinating Witch. He was 23 years old. He was in charge of the lives of 10 men, including himself. The only thing my dad had ever led in his entire life up to that point was he was the president of the math club at Southside High School in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And all of a sudden, at 23 years old, he's got life and death responsibilities. Can you imagine that?
One last question, gentlemen.
Would you mind sharing how your father escaped from the POW camp?
Yeah. I don't want to say too much because it's in the book, but you going to buy the book? I'll tell this story if you're going to buy the book. It was a bombing, and he was able to get out. The prisoner of war camp where he was accidentally bombed by the Americans in Belgrade. I'll tell you one thing. I visited that same site to the date. I think it was 67 years later. It's now a public park right across the river from Belgrade. And it was the most amazing thing for me to be in this park, the public park. I saw people laughing. I saw couples holding hands. I even saw a couple people throwing a football. And I'm thinking to myself, these people have no idea what happened here 67 years ago to this day, that this was a prisoner of war camp with death and destruction, and many men died on that day. And I just thought it was so amazing to be standing there on that. And also I'll say one last thing is that when I went to the National Archives and I was doing this research, they have a thing called bomb strike photos. So you can look at photographs that are taken from the belly of a plane, so they can know how successful the bombing was. And so I found pictures, and I think I have one in the book. Bombs are coming. You can see the bombs coming out of the plane, and down below is where my dad's prisoner of war camp. And I knew from the description it was sandy, and you could see just the faint outline of the barracks below. So imagine this. I'm looking at these photographs. You're seeing the moment that the bombs are falling down from the plane, and my dad is down there on the ground, and he was almost killed from that, from those bombs. And it's just, again, it was one of these kind of amazing moments. You go, wow.
I'll just add, Dick Bridges' escape is hair-raising. It's a good read, I'll put it that way. Jeremy, I believe we have come to the end of our session together. Mike, going to come back and take us home?
I'm going to come back.
You got the hook?
Yeah, first I want to say, I think this itself is a formative experience, an opportunity this evening. And, thanks to Tyler for that. It's certainly deeply inspirational. And what I took from that is, maybe start cautiously, but certainly start. And, what a great start for me this week, just to hear that and how memorable that is. And, certainly, sadly, this generation passes away, and even those who remember them. And so great inspiration for us to try to capture that. Thanks for doing that. Not much else. Hard to talk after that. Thanks to Rob, for leading this conversation. Certainly a pretty touching piece at that. And, almost like you said, running a marathon, Maybe Rob hasn't been running a marathon for the last 19 months, but he certainly seems a natural, just putting his feet right in front of this. Thanks for your great questions and insights, and you didn't have to correct the author at all. So, that certainly is a benefit. The corrections will come later. But, for both of you, it certainly is a memorable experience, and I'm sure for our audience here, I can't imagine you didn't take it that same away with it. Obviously, we want to thank all of our folks in the audience here this evening. You really honor Tyler, but honor the legacy of the veterans tonight by being here. And it certainly adds a sense of gravitas to that. These last 19 months has certainly been a long time. The programs have been on hold, but I'm assured that there's a string of future programming that I'm sure you all want to attend. That in this, certainly a great trendsetter now. It's going to be tough, I think, for folks to follow you after that incredible event. Certainly we'll see some more. We've got a full slate of programming for Veterans Day, November 11th, the 11th day of the 11th month. And that we've got a daytime commemoration that day. Meet the author on a book called Dear Bob, about Bob Hope's wartime correspondence with GIs around the world. And I look forward to that. Years ago, I was on stage with Bob Hope when I was a cadet at West Point, and I was one of the extras. I wasn't performing, but I sure look forward to hearing that piece again and connecting with that piece. The author Martha Bolton will be here with the co-author Linda Hope, Bob's daughter. So, that'll be pretty special, I think, as well, and hopefully everyone can join us for that. And as Pete mentioned, there's still a few spots remaining for the November 18th through the 20th International Conference on World War II. This is going to be another kind of icebreaker as we kind of move back into the post-COVID world. Hope you're able to join us for that very special event. Please check our website for these, many programs in the coming months. And, finally, I just want to say thanks again to Tyler. It's certainly a very memorable recounting, and, no small feat putting that into prose, I'm sure, and trying to capture that. As he exits the stage to make his way to the book signing table, I'm not sure where that is. There it is. Oh, good, over there. First, let's give our guest and friend Tyler Bridges one final round of applause. So with that, I'll wish you all Godspeed and good night. Thanks for coming. All right. I just want to shake your hand. Oh, hey. I don't want to do more than that. We'll talk again. Yeah, absolutely. Or you'll forgive me to tell some stories about the trouble. Beast Barracks. Beast Barracks. Yeah, there's some stories there.